Do you dream of working on a creative project but never actually find yourself making progress? Do you have to get some work done that you really don't want to have to do? And so you get lost in procrastination, and then you lose time, and you start getting more and more panicked because that thing you don't want to do is becoming harder and more daunting every day that you're not actually making any progress on it. And does that make you struggle with, the pain of letting yourself down, the mismatch between the image of yourself you have or the kind of person you want to be and what you're actually doing, what your actions are portraying you as? So how can we stop merely dreaming and start making actual progress? And how can we stop disappointing ourselves? And so in this log, I'd like to answer this question. And the main answer I have to give is the concept of trudging along. So this log is kind of a part of a series I'm doing on my ideas on discipline and productivity, I guess, which is about a way of being productive that's not about hustle culture or that's not based in shame, but instead is wise, compassionate towards ourselves and others, and that's self-driven. We're doing it because we want to do it, because we care about it, not because of some arbitrary external pressure. And so I have done one log before this, which was on the concept that discipline isn't willpower. You don't have to listen to it. You don't have to have listened to it in order to understand this one. I'll just recap it quickly, although I would still recommend you give it a listen if you're interested. But the main idea that I was conveying, and that's kind of the basis for my view of discipline, is that discipline isn't really about willpower. It's about wisdom. And by wisdom, I mean a combination of humility and foresight. Another way to say this is that discipline isn't the willpower required to get things done without any help. Quite the opposite, actually. It's the humility of recognizing that you should systematically lean on the best practices and guidelines you need in order to make real steady progress. And as I said, not because it's expected of you, but so that you can be at peace with yourself and be fulfilled and do the things that you really want to do, instead of getting stuck, not doing any progress, and getting stuck in self-loathing. And so these are issues I've struggled with. I think maybe I've been reflecting about the last log, and I think one thing maybe I could have done better was to include a bit more actual examples, because the previous log might have been a little bit too abstract. So I know that two areas where I struggled were with this kind of procrastination and not making any progress was at work as a developer, where there's this idea, this image, and even aspiring developers have it, that as a programmer, most of your job is about writing code, but actually most of your job is about reading the code other people have written, trying to understand why it's not working or why it's not, or at least how it's working currently, so you can make modifications. And that can actually be quite daunting because in real life there's like some complicated technologies. The features you have to implement aren't always very interesting. And so I won't get bogged into the details, but for different reasons, I would often struggle a lot with it and not want to have to touch it. And so I lose time because, you actually, if it was part of my job, I had to implement changes or, fixes. And in order to do this, I had to delve into this legacy code that I didn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. So that was a recurring problem. But on a more personal front, I also struggled with this. With my blog, for example, I had the idea to start my blog in the 2020, but I only actually published it in 2023. So that's at least 3 years where I had the idea that I wanted to do it, but I was doing very little progress and feeling disappointed in myself because I had this idea and it made sense to do it, but I just wasn't doing it. So what's the solution? The solution, according to me, or at least part of the solution, is this idea of trudging along. And it's basically my take on an idea that I think, or at least the main person I know that talks about it is Steven Pressfield, especially in his famous book, The War of Art. And it's the idea of making consistent small steps in spite of resistance, so, kind of like not wanting to do it for many different reasons, in spite of confusion, reluctance, and, these types of negative feelings, and this kind of wish to escape. He also talks about it as, learning to be miserable. So I'll read you one quote from The War of Art, where he says, "The hill is a son of a bitch, but what can you do? Set one foot in front of another and keep climbing. An hour passes. I'm warmer now. The pace has got my blood going. The years have taught me one skill, how to be miserable. I know how to shut up and keep humping." So that's his take. Now, the one that came to me, and the metaphor I want to share, is that of, being trapped in a forest, in a dark forest, and, having to trudge along. So I'll get into a bit more detail. So the main idea is that it takes time to see the light at the end of the tunnel for the types of tasks where, you have to struggle at the beginning and you don't want to do it. And so you need to stumble around for a while in order to get started and actually find some momentum. It's a necessary part of the process. And so the image that comes to my mind, or the way I think about it, in my case, is kind of, this idea of being lost in a dark forest or jungle. It's just really unwelcoming. It's wet, your feet are wet, and, you're kind of slopping in the mud. You're being harassed by bugs and mosquitoes. Choose your own kind of hell. Maybe it's hot and wet, or it's cold and wet. Anyways, it's not a great time. You're out of breath. You're lost. You're confused. You're tired. You just want to go home. You don't, it's just a mess, and you really would rather be anywhere else but where you're in that in that forest. But the thing is, you have a compass, and you have checked the map before you started your journey, so you know that if you keep moving towards the north, you'll make it out eventually. And so it's all about trusting the process, trusting your compass, and to keep putting one foot in front of the other until you finally make it out of the forest. And when you do, it's pretty glorious, So, and realize that would be a burst of creative inspiration, or getting momentum, or getting some clarity, and actually starting to make real progress. And, then it gets exhilarating. You're happy, and it gets easier to get started, or at least to keep going, rather. And when you actually get it, when you go through this process enough time, then you realize, I've been doing it wrong before. Like, this is the way to go. So it does requiring choosing kind of a direction. So for when it's an external constraint like work, the direction is chosen for you. So even if you don't really like it, at least it's set. For a personal project, you need to choose something that makes enough sense, that's aligned well enough with your values, what you want to do, that you'll actually stick with it. So that's another concern or thing to think about. So choosing a direction, making a wise decision, and committing. Now, you can start small at the beginning, especially because you'll need to build trust with the process. Because the most important part with trudging along is to follow the process faithfully, right? To keep trudging along forward, dragging yourself even when you really don't feel like it. Because the alternative is just staying stuck, being miserable, hating yourself, and getting behind on important stuff you have to be doing. And I think also another thing that's important to realize is that it's the only way out is through. And I'm not sure that I agree with Steven Pressfield on this idea. For Steven Pressfield, there is no beating, or there is no escaping resistance. It will always be here as long as you're trying to do creative work. You'll always have to basically overcome your resistance. Now, I'm not sure if that's true. I'm hoping, I don't know, but I'm hoping there's a way where you can actually create without resistance. You can really find inner harmony, and you can just have this fluid, frictionless state of creation. Or at least that's an ideal I'd like to try and move towards. But even if it does exist, even if it is possible, I think that in order to get there, you do need to learn to do without, to make progress in spite of friction. And so the only way out is through. So I do think that this is, even if you share the same ideal or dream as me, I still think you should learn how to learn the skills necessary to trudge along. And there are similar ideas in different fields. So I can think, for example, of George Cao, who talks about being strict with showing up. So, giving yourself commitment, making a plan and sticking to them, but then being lenient on the results, right? Because at the beginning, you're lost, you don't know what you're doing. So, the most important part basically is showing up, is trying, moving forward, even if it's very confused at the beginning. So it's okay to be lenient on the results, because if you're too perfectionistic, you'll just run away and say, oh, I'm not doing anything good. And so you'll stop moving forward and you'll break your momentum. And you have no way, of making it out of the forest. So the first step is you need to make some progress, even if it's not very good. And the more you move forward, the easier it gets, the more you start getting your bearings. And, it's also another related idea I can think of is in the Enneagram, which is a personality framework. There's this idea of there's 9 types in total, and the number 4 in the types, one of their paths for growth is letting go of their mood, because they're very centered on their current mood and they give a lot of credence to it, and basically shifting from trusting their moods to trusting principles that are consistent and remain in spite of whatever mood they feel. And so I think this kind of ties into this idea that it's kind of a dangerous misconception that doing creative work, or, now if you're just doing work that's being asked of you, you might not expect that it's supposed to feel good right away. But when it's meaningful work and creative work for you, you might be expecting that it should feel good right away. And I think that's not the case. If you want to be consistent, I mean, sometimes it is, but if you want to be consistent with creative creation, that's I'm repeating myself, but a creative output or some kind of project, it will mean weathering some rough patches here and then. And so you need to be able to face these if you want to be consistent. So in my case, to keep feeding some examples of what this might look like in real life, I actually struggled with this. It took me some time to actually, and I'm still struggling with it to an extent, but I've gotten better. But, there's an urge within me to trust my mood and resist this idea, because I'm thinking, not exactly this way, but it's kind of the general mindset is I'm a big boy. I don't need to use any training wheels. I don't want to do it slow and kind of lame. I just want to do it good right away. And this whole process is a pain in my ass. But then I only get the same results, right? I kind of get lost in distraction and procrastination. I don't do what I need to do. Or, then I have to actually do the same project that I was supposed to do with half the time because I've been procrastinating for the whole beginning. And, it just really doesn't work. So when it came to work, and I'll probably get into this in more details with a bit more techniques, but what really worked for me was just at the beginning, it's a drag to have to try and understand what's going on in the code, but just setting Pomodoro timers. So if you don't know, you can check it up online, the Pomodoro technique, but it's basically you just put a 25-minute timer where you have to work and no distraction, you just work. And then you get a 5-minute breaks and you start again. That plus adding a no distraction mode on my phone. That's pretty powerful. I would recommend you check it out, but there are usually on most Android apps, phones at least, there is a no distraction mode where basically you can kind of pause a lot of apps. So you won't be able to access them except if you disable the distraction mode, and you won't get any notification from those apps. So that is also helpful to avoid, getting lost in distractions. So that was for, kind of just more in the work environment. And then for my blog, I think another thing on top of trudging along that helped was really getting more clarity on what I was trying to do. That's a big boost. And that's kind of part of, trusting your direction, having your compass that you can trust. But even then, even with the compass and the clarity, I still had to, I've posted about 11 posts, and I also have a YouTube channel where I posted about 30 videos. And especially for the big posts, I had to weather at least one big existential crisis per post. Well, medium-ish existential depression, where I'm kind of just, reconsidering why the hell I'm doing the posts and whether I have any idea what I'm doing. And, going through and persevering in spite of that was necessary in order to finish them. So if you struggle with committing, It might be an idea that you're kind of lacking some clarity at the moment or some alignment, like the goals you set for yourself are not aligned well enough with who you truly are, want to be, your values. And so you don't trust your compass enough. So that's another area you might want to work on, getting better clarity. And that's fortunately happens to be a main topic I want to talk about here, finding clarity of who we are, of self and purpose, in spite of existential uncertainty and second guessing yourself and opportunity cost and such things. So, if you're interested in that, I'm sure you'll find other interesting ideas in what I'll have to share, hopefully. So in order to conclude, I'd just like to give you another couple of quotes. I think it can be useful to kind of broach the same concept from a few different angles, because maybe some of them won't resonate as much with you, but another might. So I'll give you another Steven Pressfield quote. This one comes from his "Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be." And definitely I would recommend, if you struggle with these, to read the Steven Pressfield book, especially the work of art. That definitely helped me in part. He's got a bit of a tough love feel to him, but he's still pretty inspiring. And he has good books. They're short. They're to the point, so I definitely recommend reading them. So in this quote, he says, "If we just keep plugging away at it, the law of self-ordering comes to our aid. Work, day in, day out exertion and concentration produces progress and order. That's the law of the universe." And there's another quote from Robert Pirsig in his book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where he says, "Stuckness shouldn't be avoided. It's a psychic predecessor of all real understanding. An egoless acceptance of stuckness is a key to an understanding of all quality." A couple of variation on the same idea. So hopefully you got something out of this idea of trudging along. If you liked it, you might want to listen to the other log where I talked about this whole idea that discipline isn't willpower, if you haven't already. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. Wishing you the best in your creative endeavors, and thanks for listening.